Welcome back. Tonight I have another baseball set presentation. I can't believe it's already been a month since I did my last. This year we're going to go back to the mid to late 70s. It's an era that I haven't captured yet with a baseball set. It's one of my favorites from that era, and it's going to be the 1976 Top Set. But before I begin, I'll talk a little bit about the set itself. It is another 660 card set. There is an update traded series cards that were actually randomly inserted into late series packs. They're not hard to find. You can easily still pick up complete sets of those at a very affordable price. The set itself features just one Hall of Fame rookie card, which also makes it kind of an affordable set during the 1970s period, and that would be Dennis Eckersley, but it also features the very last cards of Henry Aaron, which kind of does make it kind of stand out with sets in the late 70s, because it still has a player from the 1950s and 60s that's still actively playing during that time frame. So without further ado, let's go in and look at our 1976 Top Set. So I completed the set back in the early 2000s. So I probably didn't have a lot of resources at that time to be able to complete it. So I still have some cards in there that I probably want to upgrade at some point. As we go through here, I'll point out some of the Hall of Famers. As we go through the set, some of the the variations of cards they have within here as far as like the subsets. And we'll just talk a little bit about the 1976 baseball seasons as we do it, as well as the value of the set currently. So starting with the first one, they have the record breakers. Those are starting to be featured in the 1970s and continued on through the 1980s and 90s, and even to this day, they still have some record breaker cards sometimes in sets. Starting at the top, you have Hank Aaron, who at that point reached the lifetime record for runs batted in. I believe he still holds that record, so I'm not mistaken. We also have featured on here Tom Seaver right in the middle, who was the most consecutive seasons with 200 or more strikeouts. I'm not sure if that's still a record at this point. Then you also have cards for Bobby Bonds, Mickey Lowich, Davey Lopes, some other pretty notable names during the 1970s and early 80s. As you can see, this design for the card is going to be, here's one of the base cards. You have at the bottom, the colors are going to vary on the banners that you have here for the cards. You're going to have, obviously you can see here with the Padres, often there's color matches with the uniforms. Not always, but typically that's what they were striving to be able to do. I think they look a lot like the 1959 Bazooka cards. You can kind of think about those cards. But these are obviously a much cheaper option than trying to put together the 1959 Bazooka set. All right, so let's kind of jump into it. The backs of the cards are going to be this green print. They have a full stat line on here for these cards. They're going to be horizontal in nature. The All-Star cards were different. They didn't have separate All-Star cards for this set. I believe this was the first year they started doing it, where they just had an emblem on the card saying that this person was an All-Star. Starting with Lou Brock up here in the corner. Then you have the team cards that are coming back in the set again at this point, as opposed to having manager cards on there with a separate manager card with the coaches. You have the manager down in the corner. You see Billy Martin's on here with the Yankee team. This George Brett is a very difficult card to find in perfect condition, because I believe it was printed on the edge of the printing sheet. So when they cut it, often it was getting its corner kind of cut off a little bit. So it's often off center when you see this card. So it's commonly found in being off center, but when you're trying to find one that's perfectly centered, you might have to pay quite a bit for it. Probably more than you might think for a second-year card, but that is the reason why. With the 1967 or 1976 Top Set, they were all printed in one and released in one series. So there's no more of the high series that you see, like starting with 1973 and going older beyond that. Dusty Baker up here in the corner, hopefully a future Hall of Famer. Tony Oliva, one of our newest Hall of Famers, down here in the bottom. A very affordable Hall of Famer to collect is Tony Oliva. Boog Powell, when he got moved to the Indians, and played for Frank Robinson. The 1976 MVPs were Thurman Munson for the American League and Joe Morgan for the National League. Fred Lynn here with the cup here, not a Hall of Famer, but Pretty notable player during this time frame. Gaylord Perry up in the corner with the Rangers. Here's one card I need to replace because someone wrote Twin on here as opposed to Mets. That would be a pretty easy one to replace. It's not going to be super expensive. I don't think I noticed it at the time when I put together in the early 2000s on a budget. Here's an interesting little insert for the set. They have fathers and sons. So they have Major League fathers and Major League sons that played together. What's kind of fun for the fathers ones, you can see that they're cards from the 1950s. Earl Weaver on the Baltimore Orioles at the top here. The 1976 World Series featured the New York Yankees and the Cincinnati Reds. Cincinnati Reds were eventual champions and won 2 in a row at that point. Down here in the corner, we have Jim Cott. The other playoff teams during this period were the runner-ups in the AL were the Kansas City Royals and the Philadelphia Phillies in the National League. Here we have Brooks Robinson right in the middle. It's one of my favorite cards of Brooks Robinson, even though you can't really see his face, but I think it's just kind of a cool image. Down here at the bottom, we have the sole rookie card in this set of a Hall of Famer, and that's Dennis Eckersley. Jim Catfish Hunter up here in the corner. Cincinnati Red teams with Sparky Anderson. Our first checklist that we have here. Ken Griffey Sr. at the top there. One of my favorite names in baseball history, Bake McBride. A little bit of a run here without a Hall of Famer, even though we got some pretty notable names during the time period, like Vida Blue and also Larry Bow up in the corner. Steve Garvey, who could be a future Hall of Famer, depending how the Veterans Committee views him. Probably one of the better first basemen in the National League during the 1970s and early 80s. Dave Winfield down in the corner, still with the Padres at this point. There's his third Padre card. Goose Gossage with the White Sox before he went over to the Yankees. I like those old White Sox uniforms with the red lettering. Dave Parker, the Cobra right in the middle. Not a Hall of Famer, but I believe should be a future consideration for it. Okay, now we got the league leaders. Very similar to previous years, they'll have more than just the leader. They'll have second and third place, and if there's ties, they'll have more players featured. These are fun cards. You can get a couple Hall of Famers on the same card, which I think is always kind of cool. So far in this one, I can see that usually it's just one Hall of Famer on most of the cards. Some of them don't have that at all. This one's got 2 right here with Johnny Bench and Tony Perez for the runs batted in leaders. Rod Carew up in the corner there. We have 2 with Hunter and Palmer. Down here we have 3 Hall of Famers with the ERA leaders. We got Palmer, Hunter, Eckersley. Seaver again. We have Perry and Bar 11 on here. And the fireman for the Saves leader, we got Goose Gossage. You might be wondering how much will this set me back if I just want to be able to purchase the set. eBay was pretty at a huge range. For near mint, you're going to be looking, or mint and near mint, you're going to be looking for about $1,000. So that one you might even want to try to either have a dealer that you really trust their opinion and their assessment of their cards, or have a chance to inspect it yourself just so you can see that those are the condition that it's really in. Because if you're going to pay that much for a set, in my opinion, you just want to make sure that you're getting what you think you're buying at that point, although I know you probably can return it for most people. Some of them will feature like graded cards and stuff in there, so you can kind of verify that's exactly what you're kind of picking up as well. But like mid-grade, which is where this is going to be at, you're probably looking between $400 to $600. So it's a nice one you can just pick up quickly and add to your collection if you're not wanting to be patient to build the set itself. It didn't cost nearly as much when I put together the set back in the day. I think at the time in the early 2000s I put it together, I think it was pushing maybe 150. So slow growth over time, but growth nevertheless. Got Carly Yastrzemski right in the middle here. Also one of my favorite images because this is actually at Old Comiskey Park, which I think is pretty cool. Kansas City's got Whitey Herzog featured on there. We've got Burt Bryleven. Terribly miscut cards. I guess that one needs to be on the chopping block for a replacement. Pete Rose, who I think should be in the Hall of Fame personally. See if that ever happens. Fergie Jenkins down in the corner. I think this was the very first card I got for the 1976 set. And I got it probably in like one of those vending machines they had back in the day. Where they had like a lot of the junk that people didn't want anymore, a lot of the commons. So I was kind of hooked on the design at that point. I really liked having these little player images in the corner here. For whatever reason, it just was pretty captivating to me. We got Buckner up there, not a Hall of Famer, but a very good player. Pop Stargell down here in the corner. For whatever reason, all the Cubs like team cards during the 70s just had their heads. None of the other cards were like that, which is kind of funny. I don't know why the Cubs did that. Had to be different, I guess. Ted Simmons, one of the newer Hall of Famers. Here's a fun one, Johnny Bench. That'd probably be on my list to replace too, even though it doesn't look terrible, but you can get better condition cards pretty easily during the 1970s. It's not the same battle you faced during the 50s and 60s or 40s. Dick Williams down in the corner as a manager. Pretty famous local White Sox player. Used to do a lot of studio work for them as he was a retired player for many, many, many years. So it was a name that we all recognized as White Sox fan. Belton Bill Melton. Robin Yount. I just thought this guy had a fun name when I was a kid. Candelaria. It was just fun to say. Tony Perez. Also pretty affordable Hall of Famer to be able to pick up. Now here's a Nolan Ryan card that I would love to upgrade at some point just because it's so miscut. It's really off center as a result of it. That's really the only problem with the card. The corners are still pretty good, but that's a pretty noticeable flaw for that card. But again, you know, I got these back in the early 2000s. I was just happy to have it at that point. Jim Rice down in the corner. I love this Jim Rice card. The first one featured just him as a player on it too. Then they had the Sporting News All-Time All-Star. So they picked one All-Star per position. Through obviously the 1975 season, they picked like the all-time greats. So you may disagree with the selections at that point. There are going to be a lot of players from the dead ball era and pre-integration, which I know would look very different now and probably will look very different when they do the Heritage set for this in a few years. So Garrick might still be the first baseman selection. Hornsby probably would be one that you probably can make a good argument still needs to be in there. Pie Trainer would probably not be the guy you'd pick anymore. Probably go with like Mike Schmidt or something like that. Wagner could still make a good argument for short. Ruth probably definitely will be selected. Cobb and Williams will be difficult ones. Definitely will be some great Hall of Fame outfielders you might want to insert in there that are Not currently featured in this set. So that'll be kind of interesting what they decide on as they redo this when they get to Heritage. This will probably definitely be Johnny Bench. Mickey Cochran, obviously the inspiration for Mickey Mantle's name because his dad was a huge Mickey Cochran fan. Walter Johnson and Lefty Grove, probably perfect selections at the time. Might see something different now when they redo it. So that would be fun when they redo Heritage to see what happens there. Nice part of those cards, you have the full stat line for these players. And I think at the time this was printed, in these selections, it's possible that only Ruth may have still been alive. Or no, I'm sorry, only Ted Williams might have still been alive, if I'm not mistaken. It's possible maybe Lefty Grove was still at that point. Steve Carlton here in the corner. Pudge, Carlton Fisk. Steve Stone. Only a pretty notable name because of his broadcast career more than anything else in the area. Spent a lot of time with the Cubs and the White Sox as a broadcaster. Bill's Baseball Lee. Not a Hall of Famer, but a fun character nevertheless. Rod Carew. Raleigh Fingers. Joe Morgan, the MVP for this season. Phil Necro. Gary Carter down here in the bottom. Also his first card where he's featured by himself. Pretty cool image. It's a mix of portraits, as you can see, and also action images like this Jim Palmer, which is a pretty cool action image, I think. Lou Piniella might get in as a manager now. They've changed some of the rules of like how they're going to be doing Hall of Fame voting. Hope this guy in the future doesn't get shortchanged, but Dick Allen, I think, should be reconsidered. This is when he went back to Philadelphia after all those years. Didn't last long there. And unlike in previous series and sets, I should say, that they had like more highlights for the World Series and playoffs. This one, they just have one card doing the Championship Series and one card featuring the World Series, and they have stats on the back for the games. And that's about it. So not really something that really kind of captures that season all that well, but it is still kind of cool. So you can see from the 1975 season, which was the season where the Red Sox took out the Red Sox. I'm sorry, the Reds took out the Red Sox in the World Series and featured that Fisk home run in Game 6. Frank Robinson down here on the manager card. Mike Schmidt. They actually have a pretty good condition Schmidt there. It's kind of nice. If I ever were to think about sending one in for grading, that probably would be one of the ones I might consider for this set. Reggie Jackson right here in the middle. I think it's his last card with the Athletics. I think that was the season actually played, I think, for Baltimore for a year, and then ended up in with the Yankees by the following season. Willie McCovey down here in the corner. Billy Williams, his last card as an active player with the Athletics, which I think is actually kind of a cool image of him anyway, even though obviously he was at the end of his career at that point. But still kind of cool nevertheless. Don Sutton down here. here's the Hank Aaron card up here in the corner. Mine's actually in pretty good shape too. Maybe the image is a little off center, so I'd probably definitely bring the grade down. So probably not something I would actually submit, but still looks pretty nice in the set as is now. And I think that was the first vintage Aaron that I personally purchased, even though I already had one in my collection at that point. This one is one of those all-time great cards to kind of consider picking up because it's so unique. It's on a lot of people's list of like oddball cards to be able to pick up. Not because of the player, but just because of the competition that was being captured on it, but also the size of the bubble that he actually blew that won the competition. Dwight Evans, possibly a future Hall of Famer. They do have airbrushing on these things, so that still hadn't gone away. So Don Kessinger had his whole thing airbrushed, so he could look like he was actually with the Cardinals, even though I think he probably was featured in a Cubs uniform in that one before they did all their touching up on it. Red Shandies. I think it might be one of the last cards that he actually appears on before he returned as a manager briefly in like 1990, and then he retired shortly thereafter. Joe Torre, speaking of Hall of Fame managers. All right, then you're going to have all these rookie cards. I have like 4 people featured on it. It's going to be done by position. There's a couple names of note that are on there, but no Hall of Famers. But some guys that you've probably definitely heard of. Willie Randolph being one of them. Ron Guidry, like another. You have this beautiful image of Tom Seaver here, which I think is his second to last card as a New York Met. It's one of my favorite images of him, and probably one of the more affordable ones to be able to pick up if you're looking to get a nice Tom Seaver in your collection. I say that just knowing that I just picked up his rookie card recently, and it was not a cheap card. Okay, we're getting near the end. Not a lot of Hall of Famers left here. Appreciate you sticking with me on this one. Thurman Munson, the American League MVP. Maybe someone that needs to be reconsidered for the Hall of Fame. And here we go. Here's the inserts for the updates. So unlike having a whole new numbered card starting with like 661, they would just match it up with the number where the player featured in the set and saying, hey, this player is now with this team. It's like the Dusty Baker here. There's a couple Hall of Famers in here, starting with Jim Cott. Ferguson Jenkins. Getting near the end, Willie Randolph. That's a pretty popular card with that one because it's a card all to himself, and the first one with the Yankees. It's still his rookie season. So he's actually got 2 rookie cards. And then finally the end with the checklist just for the traded cards. And also used wax pack, which I thought was kind of a nice toss in with it when I got those cards back in the day. All right, I hope you enjoyed it. And until next month, we'll feature another set. So have a great evening.